So I have a quick question as people are getting settled. In 1972, when Zhou Enlai was asked what he thought were the biggest ramifications of the French Revolution, what did he say? Too soon to tell, right? If you don't know the anecdote. So February 24th, 2022, we already know that his had huge implications for everyone, certainly in this room, but across the world, in politics and national security, even, if energy security, food security, what we think about nation states and what they can and can't do on the international stage. And certainly for NATO, rather than diminish NATO, NATO has been strengthened. And NATO is bigger, right, with the accession of new members in the near future. We're going to talk about the cyber aspects of international relations and conflict with 5 experts here. And I couldn't be more delighted, or we couldn't have 5 better panelists. And so to get right into it, we'll start with Nataliya Tkachuk, the head of Information and Cybersecurity Directorate, Office of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine. So thank you for being here, Nataliya. We're all honored, and please take it away.
Thank you, Kenneth. Hello to everyone. Доброго ранку. Ми з України. And first of all, I would like to thank to Estonia for your support. Because we know that you did all what was possible and all what was impossible for Ukraine to become a member of the CCDCOE. Also, we thank the CCDCOE team and all the country members for unanimous voting for Ukraine. It is very important to my country, and we do appreciate it a lot. So 2 days ago, Ukrainian delegation for the first time took place in the official meeting of the steering committee. And I hope that all the technical procedures will not take too much time, and very soon Ukraine will become a full nation, contributing nation to the CCDCOE. And for sure, our contribution will be beneficial to all the member countries, because Ukraine has a unique experience of dealing with the cyber war, and we are eager to share this experience with you. And as far as we have this experience, now we can discuss and we can make conclusions about the role of cyber in a modern war. And I should say that taking into consideration the level of ICT, the level of the digitalization of most countries in the world, today we cannot compare potential harm from cyber attacks to those deaths and casualties from bombing, from artillery strikes, from using prohibited weapons against Ukrainian population. This cruelty and inhumanity of killing Ukrainian civil population, men, women, kids, destroying our houses, destroying our schools, hospitals, raping our women and girls, and just many other things that are being done by Russian soldiers. All this right now cannot be compared to the results of cyber attacks. There's another conclusion that we made, that in a modern war, cyber became a very important part of preconditioning for further military invasion. And if a country is not ready to counter this threat, then the enemy will get a great advantage. But Ukraine was ready. A few months before this war had started, we understood that something was going on in the cyber sphere. And on 20th of January, we initiated and we conducted the urgent meeting of the National Cybersecurity Coordination Center of Ukraine. They were the Vice Prime Minister for Digital Transformation, the heads of the Security Service of Ukraine, the head of the intelligence body of Ukraine, and other members presented on this meeting. And we adopted a number of very important decisions of strategic character, how to prepare Ukraine for potential cyber strikes. And at the very beginning of February, we launched a 24-hour response center. And all the representatives from the main stakeholders responsible for cybersecurity in Ukraine, the State Service for Special Communications and Information Protection, the Ukraine's National CERT, the Security Service of Ukraine, MOD, General Staff of Armed Forces, Cyber Police, all their representatives, 24 hours a day, were monitoring cyberspace, were monitoring cyber threats to be able to react proactively. Also, we involved to this activity private sector and operators of critical infrastructure. And 1 week before the invasion by itself, we noticed a huge, massive wave of cyber attacks at our critical infrastructure. These attacks were targeted to banking sphere, energy sector, telecom sphere, satellite telecom operators, internet service providers. These attacks were very sophisticated, simultaneous, and well-coordinated. And only due to professional work and coordinated work of our main stakeholders, help of international partners, and support from our private sector, we managed to deal with this threat. And most part of these attacks were detected and neutralized in time. So they really didn't get too much harm to Ukraine's critical infrastructure. But you just imagine what could have happened if we were not able to do this, if Ukraine were not prepared, if our cybersecurity capacities were not developed. I suppose that at the day of invasion, probably the electricity would be cut off, the banking sphere would be paralyzed, people would not be able to get objective, proper information about what was going on because the internet service providers wouldn't be working. The general staff of armed forces also would be paralyzed without any communications, including satellite communications. And under such circumstances, I think that the aggressor country would have much more chances even to capture Kiev. So that is the role of cybersecurity in a modern war. You know, every day and now, I'm thankful to Ukrainian armed forces, to those men and women who every day, risking their lives, are on the front edge of this terrible war. But not less, I'm thankful to those our cyber warriors who were and who are protecting Ukraine's critical infrastructure and Ukraine's cyberspace. And personally, I would like to thank to Viktor Zhora, who is right now with me on this panel, because he and his professional team from the State Service of Special Communication and Information Protection, together with the team of the Security Service of Ukraine and Ministry of Defense, from the very first days were on the front line of this cyber war. And let's call the things by their names. Let's call a spade a spade. We should not talk about a war in Ukraine. We should talk about war in Europe, started by Russian Federation. And we should not talk about cyber attacks from Russia. We should talk about First World Cyber War that we need to be united to stand to. And to deal with this war, to stand to it, we need to create an effective international cyber coalition. So we are greatly thankful to all our international partners for your support, to EU and NATO countries, especially to the United States of America, to international IT businesses that are being supporting us, to cyber volunteers all around the world, because without you, we would not be able not only to win, because I'm sure that Ukraine are winning this war right now, but even to survive in this war. So also, we're thankful for the world's community for diplomatic measures that had been taken, because as you can see, the sanctions implied to Russia also rather weakened their possibilities for cyber strikes. On 10th of May, Ukraine, the USA, and the EU made common statement condemning Russian aggression in cyberspace and attributing recent cyber attacks to Russia. So you can see that this international cyber coalition is being forming right now. So I urge all our partners, all the democratic world, countries, businesses, academia, cyber warriors and volunteers, join this coalition. Stand with Ukraine, stand for Ukraine, in the sake of safe, secure, and transparent cyberspace. Because only together we can stop Russia, at least in a cyber war. Thank you.
Thank you, Nataliya. So between 2014 and 17, I was so fortunate to get to teach a university class in cybersecurity in Kiev, and what a wonderful city, and I hope you all get a chance, if you haven't, to go to Kiev and support in the rebuilding of Ukraine in the very near future. When I got to live there, one of my good friends, I'm so happy to say, has joined us on stage, Victor. Victor's the kind of guy that just represents for me Ukraine, just smart, positive, professional, focused, etc. So, as Deputy Chairman and Digital Transformation Officer of the State Security for Special Communications and Protection of Information in Ukraine, please, Victor Zhora.
Thank you. And thank you, Nataliya, for coordinating our cyber defense activities. It's exciting to speak at CyCon for the very first time, and it was exciting to participate in a steering committee of CCDCOE. And I believe it's a sign of recognition of what Ukraine has done in defending our values, in defending our independence and sovereignty over the last 8 years, in fighting for values of democracy and European values, in aggression which is provided by the Russian Federation against Ukraine. But it's more important and more exciting to feel support from everybody during our numerous meetings here in Tallinn, during all our negotiations, and here at conference, even because of colors of beige and a lot of Ukrainian flags and symbols in the city. Thank you very much for this. With regards to the war, there are 3 versions. Someone says that the war began on 24th of February. Another version, it began in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea and occupation in eastern part of Donbass. Somebody says that it actually began 4 centuries ago. But with regards to cyber war, we understand that it started in May 2014 with the attack on Central Election Commission. And that was the first strike in this cyber war, which was followed by numerous cyber attacks on Ukrainian critical infrastructure, on power grid in 2015 and 2016, on Ukrainian media companies, on Ukrainian government entities, and followed by the most destructive cyber attack in history, NotPetya, in June 2017. And as Nataliya said, Ukraine carried out lessons from these cyber attacks and put so much attention to creating of our cybersecurity system, in legislation, in building capacities, in preparing workforce. In the middle of January, after 4 years of rather calm period without serious destructive cyber attacks, but recording a huge number of attacks which was constantly growing, we observed escalation of cyber war with the attack on Ukrainian government websites on January 14th, and then huge DDoS attacks on Ukrainian banks, government entities in the middle of February, which was followed by a full-scale invasion on 24th. And we all understand that this is the first time in history when The conventional war is combined with cyber war, and cyber operations are used to support kinetic operation. And probably in history books there will be recorded that the cyber component of war began on January 14th. And what we observe over the last 3 months of war, we see that cyber aggression supports kinetic operation for some times, or these cyber operations can be used separately to attack, to target Ukrainian critical infrastructure, government entities, energy sector, supply chain, financial sector, and mostly telecom sector. And Ukraine was very lucky keeping the communication alive, even on occupied territories, even despite attempts of adversary to reroute traffic, to intercept traffic of Ukrainian citizens on occupied territories, to get control over telecom infrastructure, including broadcasting infrastructure. And this is our day-to-day work to prevent these attempts and to provide cyber resilience to our country. And of course, that cannot be possible with the absence of support from our expert community, showing the great result in private-public partnership. We were able to hire a lot of professionals from private sector, which are helping our country to defend. And we worked a lot of support from global expert community who are helping Ukraine to resist. And of course, we feel constant support, and we provided a lot of assistance from our international partners, from global IT providers. This includes supply of hardware, software, threat intel, a lot of consultancy that helps Ukraine to continue defending our cyberspace. And the importance of this assistance is hard to overestimate, and we are grateful for everybody who helps Ukraine to defend ourselves in cyber. But again, we have very good examples of countries, mainly Estonia, who's a brilliant example of digital transformation, which is combined with the cyber security, with the protection of information assets. And we used Estonia as an example. And by the way, a lot of organizations from Estonia made serious contribution to our resistance, to our resilience. And we had a lot of cybersecurity exercises with CyberExer, with e-governance academy. And what we have done over the last 4 years or 5 years from NotPetya attack was done together with our partners from the United States, USAID projects, with the European Commission, EU for Digital UA, many other projects which help Ukraine get this capacity. And we are lucky that Roman Boiarchuk from Kyiv joined us. He was the person who started building cyber protection capacities in Ukraine. And obviously, this is the key factor that help us to continue be resilient. And if we succeed in defending Ukrainian cyberspace, and our armed forces will succeed on the battlefields, I believe that we'll be able to stop this aggression with the help of our partners, since Ukraine is not defending only our territory, our land. We're defending all Europe. We are defending all civilized world against this unprovoked, unprecedented aggression from Russian Federation. And of course, I believe Ukraine will prevail. Thank you so much.
Unfortunately, our next speaker couldn't be here with us in person, hopefully next time, but we're so honored to have Roman Boiarchuk of the International Cybersecurity University in Ukraine, who is a true expert on resilience and the strengthening of IT toward national security ends in Ukraine. So thank you so much for being with us, Roman, and please.
Thank you, Kenneth. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Roman Boiarchuk, and I'm talking from Kiev, Ukraine's capital. In our country, there is martial law in place. Therefore, not everyone is able to travel abroad, only officials. And I'm head of the board of the Ukrainian NGO, International Cybersecurity University, which supports the cybersecurity-related processes in public institutions of Ukraine, as well as engaged in analysis and research. Also, I was the head of a state center for cyber protection from 2016. That time I first time met Kenneth in Kiev, until 2019, when we had presidential and parliament election in our country. This period, Ukraine was subject to a series of very powerful cyber attacks, including attacks on energy sector, black energy, governmental agency, and business, like Petya. And we had to start very actively to enforce our cybersecurity capabilities. And I'm also very glad that Victor Zhora is present today here in this panel. He provided great assistance in building Ukrainians' cyber defense those times. Since February, war in our country that in fact less from 2014 faced completely new phase, direct military invasion. Since the beginning of this phase, we in NGO watched very closely the events in cyberspace in particular, and very interesting situation that arose due to a desire of many volunteers from around the world to support Ukraine in its efforts to protect the integrity and our people, to protect our freedom, independence, and democracy. And this seems to be a very first world experience of so many people from all over the world in one-sided actions. Observing the situation through information from a large number of sources, we have formed some initial thoughts. And while having big attacking capabilities, Russian defense capabilities have been overestimated. The result could be seen in the first month of Russian invasion. A huge amount of resources, both from Russia and Belarus, or so-called Luhansk and Donetsk Republic, were disabled, defaced, and hacked. While Russian military or some governmental resources had some protection, most commercial and other governmental resources had extremely low levels of protection. Russian hackers have attacked objects that all other countries consider either uninteresting or unethical, no matter how strange they may sound. Usually worldwide, hackers' specific goals to seize information for sales or just to make money. In some rare cases, targets are simply the ambitions of attackers, while Russians often use cyber attacks and reinforcement for political, informational, military operations that radically change the list of targets and methods of attacks. If you look around the modern attack landscape, you will see that these types of operation usually attributed to Russians. This happened before. As an example, NotPetya is known all over the world. If you remember, during that attack, bad actors were using ransomware Petya that was discovered a few years ago, very different way to destroy critical information and to eliminate all these traces. This caused a huge impact in various sectors of economy and supposed to create a panic. Other example in attacks of Ukrainian treasury or Ministry of Finance that happened at the end of 2016. That time, by destruction of system in these agencies, Russians intend to impact all the end-year payments. Therefore, realizing that specific in the work of Russian cyber criminals was all must prepare for other protection schemes. Also, we must prepare for the fact that before Russians were restrained or limited by certain international agreements or rules in the field of cyber attacks. Now they will no longer have these restrictions. They will act more aggressively. And they will definitely attack because they have been developing this type of operation for a long time, have a governmental support, and already has large capacity. The protection of Russian countrywide network only on the level of external connection has shown some effectiveness, especially in terms of protection against DDoS attack. But they are external connection protection systems designed not just for DDoS protection, but also has a DPI capabilities. This makes Russian network as isolated from the world as in China. It will affect availability of information inside the country and consequently freedom of will. And this approach demonstrates a new look at the locally separated national network. The first example of such a network was established in China years ago. And now Russia also reached this approach. However, it's very important that these technical capabilities can be achieved today only with equipment and technology from a global manufacturer. Only partial management and control of traffic without them is possible. While China has its own manufacturing capabilities, Russian network protection relies mostly on Western equipment and technology. These aspects makes us rethink regular threat model on country level, and it is very important that Ukraine have abilities to participate CCDCOE activities. And I would like to thank you, CCDCOE, and all the NATO member states for your great support of Ukraine in our fight for freedom. Thank you very much.
So Russia may achieve some tactical successes on the battlefield, but I think that from a strategic perspective, political, military, cyber, moral, it's been a failure, right? February 24th and beyond. And one of the most obvious examples of that is in NATO, how NATO has not been diminished but strengthened. And today we're fortunate to have Catharina Candolin here from Finland, from the OP Group and the SSH Communications Security Cooperation, to tell us a little bit more about Finland's perspective on these events. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you also for inviting me to come back to CyCon. It's wonderful to be here, although we are living in tragical times. Although cyber operations in a military context is nothing new, the ongoing war in Ukraine is probably the first time that the cyber domain has been used to such an extent in a full-scale conventional war. Of course, the cyber attacks have naturally preceded the kinetic attacks. And this is probably going to be a new normal, so in any war or conflict now and in the future, the cyber element will be present. But also as a result of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the discussion of a NATO membership for Finland and also for Sweden took a whole new turn. And as you probably know, Finland has a 1,300-kilometer long border with Russia. We have been fighting wars with Russia 80 years ago. I am still a generation that has grandparents who were fighting the war. We still have war veterans alive, although they are getting fewer by the number. So we have been growing up with the threat that has now been realized in Ukraine, and this is something that we feel very deeply also in Finland, and we feel for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. So this has affected the NATO discussion in Finland, and in only 3 months' time, 2 traditionally militarily unaligned nations discussed, decided, and applied for NATO membership. And in Finland, the support for NATO membership is now over 70%, from having been only a little bit more than 20%. Of course, it was expected that as a result of the discussion and also the decision that Russia would conduct hybrid operations towards us, including cyber operations and information operations. So as a result, we raised our preparedness not only for the military, but in the whole of society. For example, the critical infrastructures have raised the preparedness and expecting that something might happen to them. Also, all the humans, or the population has raised their awareness, so people are encouraged to have a 72-hour basic needs at home, so food, water, and so on. So in case something would happen, then they would cope until the whole preparedness organization gets its wheels going. Of course, information operations is not a new phenomenon for us either. I mean, our NATO discussion has been affected for decades, and it has been kind of, NATO has been portrayed as something it is not, and there's been kind of these false misconceptions that then your conscripts have to go and fight the wars of the United States, which is of course not true. But there has been a lot of misinformation about NATO and what joining NATO would mean. But we were still expecting more aggressive rhetorics now that the discussion started, and rightly so. We were experiencing things. So, for example, Russia threatened us that they will respond. They also claimed that joining NATO will have military consequences for Finland. There were fake pictures spreading about Russia moving, for example, military material closer to the borders of Finland. And when President Zelensky addressed the Finnish parliament, one thing we saw was, for example, violation of our airspace. Well, this is nothing new. They have been violating it before, but this was very much timed with President Zelensky's talk to our parliament. And we also saw cyber operations that actually could be classified as information operations. They were denial of service attacks that were targeted on the Ministry of Defense and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and this was also during Zelensky's talk. They made the headlines, so they kind of gave the impression that now there is some aggression going on from Russia's side, but they had no real impact, so it has absolutely zero impact on the Finnish defense forces and their operational capabilities. But other than that, when looking at cyberspace, the situation has been or remained calm, to much to our surprise, at least so far. But we maintained our preparedness, so some things that we are expecting. Well, first of all, cyber operations as information operations that we already saw one example of. Another thing could be cyber operation for the purpose of getting money, just a little bit like North Korea is doing. So in order to support their own development of ballistic missiles and nuclear arms, they are reverting to cybercrime to get money to fund that. A third thing could be sabotage. So just to annoy us or take out some revenge for our decision or show some discontent, we could expect, for example, wiper operations or something like that. But of course, the worst case scenario would be that there would be a large-scale attack on our critical infrastructure, on which the whole of our society depends. That could mean that Russia and their intelligence would already have been residing in our system for years before this, and kind of prepared the battlefield so that if and when needed, they could launch a full-scale attack on our critical infrastructures. So far, we haven't seen this, but we remain prepared. But of course, this raises also the question that what does it mean to defend the sovereignty of a nation also in cyberspace? So if we think of the logic that a large-scale attack could be considered an armed attack if its effects and implications are similar to that one, then that would give the nation the right already to defend itself. But that would require quite a few things. First of all, attribution. You need to have both the technical skills but also the political will to attribute. We need to discuss countermeasures. What are they? What could they be? Diplomacy, sanctions, military responses, anything in between. So kind of to keep the toolbox open. Also, situational awareness across society, not only the authorities. Of course, the military is having a situational awareness. The Cybersecurity Center is having, the police is having, but so do the critical infrastructure owners and the private sector. So how do we combine all of this to have a national cyber situational awareness picture? There needs to be operational leadership, so we can't sit and wait that when something happens, then we start to figure out how to do this. This has to be in place and exercised. Of course, the legislation needs to be in place and the international collaboration because, one country cannot fight cyber attacks alone. But the question is, of course, that is the rhetoric that if you attack us through cyberspace, then we will respond. Is that enough for deterrence? Maybe, maybe not. Anyway, the cyber domain is going to be the new normal, and we will remain our preparedness and see what will happen during this membership process. And I don't know if and when Finland will eventually join NATO, but of course I'm hoping it will be soon. Thank you.
So you know what they say about Las Vegas is that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, right? And that's supposed to be a good thing. What happens, unfortunately, in Moscow doesn't seem to stay in Moscow, but it reverberates out to Georgia and Ukraine and Transnistria and Estonia. And so even as Moscow fails in its current invasion, other authoritarian nations are watching as far away as China, North Korea, and elsewhere to try and learn from Moscow's mistakes to do better. And so, you know, we really need to think about the implications from the big picture for the future, for the planet, for Europe, for NATO, and to help us get there is the author of the Moscow Rules, Keir Giles, from the Russia and Eurasia program at Chatham House.
Thank you, Kenneth. Good morning, everybody. Kenneth's asked me to draw some lessons observed on the basis of placing what we've seen happening in Ukraine in the context of having watched Russia prepare for this war for the last decade and a half, which has been my job for most of that time, which of course doesn't mean that I got some things right. I got some of them just as wrong as some of the people who suddenly became instant experts on the Russian military in January of this year. But we can see some things that Russia wanted to do and actually succeeded in doing in Ukraine. And that's where we get the lessons for what might come next for other people. It's been really interesting to watch the differences between how Russia's conducted its conventional military campaign and what it's been doing in the information domain, including cyber. Because so many of Russia's early conventional failures were as a result of launching a war that was different from the one that they had trained and organized and equipped for, partly on the basis of expecting that they were going to be greeted with flowers, not javelins, but for a whole lot of other reasons as well. But in information and cyber, they did do what they actually set out to do. And they've been practicing what we've been observed them trialing since 2008, with an acceleration since 2014. And that is a key reason why there has been not greater success by Russia in achieving what they wanted to do. All of the different elements that Russia treated as important in prosecuting an information and cyber war, we've documented, not least through papers that have been released through previous iterations here at CyCon. We've watched them try it out, and so we know what they thought they wanted to do. And that's across all of those integrated domains that Russia thinks are part of a seamless whole when prosecuting information operations. That's the technical cyber aspect. That's targeting connectivity. That's the impact on the cognitive domain for tactical or operational or strategic effect. Across the whole of them, Russia attempted to use its expected methods of information warfare in open conflict over and above the ongoing campaigns that Nataliya outlined that were happening before the actual start of the invasion. There was information interdiction. We hear a lot about the Viasat hack, but we need to place that in the context of a much broader campaign against communications infrastructure, against media, using both cyber and kinetic means to try to make sure that Ukraine can't communicate with its citizens. Because Russia, after the experience of Crimea, thought that this was a war-winning tool. We've seen personalized, targeted deception on a mass basis delivered to connected devices and cyber-supported influence and deception operations. We've seen the campaign against critical infrastructure in a direct parallel to what Russia's conventional military has been doing, hammering the Ukrainian economy through targeting its infrastructure, hammering humanitarian facilities because Russia thinks that triggering humanitarian crises is how you win a war. And then, of course, that supports the presumption that we had 10 years ago when Russia was pushing for regulation in cyberspace, that when they were asking for specifications of critical infrastructure facilities or humanitarian facilities that should be off limits for cyber conflict, what they were actually asking for was a target list. And then, of course, the attempts at integration of kinetic and cyber power that we've heard Victor talk about already. So they acted as planned, but they failed in so many ways, but for different reasons, again, than the conventional military operations. They missed the boat in so many ways in terms of information operations. If you take as a case study the deepfake, the rather crude deepfake of President Zelensky in the middle of March calling for surrender and attempts by Russia to disseminate that as widely as possible within Ukraine, it was way too late. Not only too late since the start of the war, but actually too late by years. Because deepfakes as a political influence tool are gone and past. Because even as long ago as 2019, in the neighboring Center of Excellence here in Riga, we were writing about how the time for maximum impact of deepfake videos had already passed because they were familiar and everybody knew what they were. So it had close to zero impact. And also the long testing of all of these tools has allowed victims and adversaries of Russia to learn, to prepare, to adapt. In the case of calls for surrender, apparently from the national leader, we've had so long to adapt that those are built into the crisis preparedness booklets that are distributed to the civilian population in countries like Sweden and Latvia. This will happen, don't believe it. And on an operational level, that cyber-kinetic integration, there have been marginal successes, but strategically, it seems to have encountered the same failure to date as Russia's military campaign. The reason, of course, is that Russia fails when it has an adversary that is prepared and determined. And that has come as something of a surprise to some of my colleagues in the academic community, particularly those who focus on international relations, that were not expecting that to happen. It's the value of fighting back and having an active defense. Yesterday, we heard from Catharina of his experience of talking to Ukrainian officers complaining about having had to fight for 8 years with one arm tied behind their back. That's no longer the case. And another key difference, Ukraine, of course, unlike Russia, has friends in the fight, as we've been hearing throughout the whole of this week. Not just that state support, but also the private sector, private enterprise that has a vested interest in protecting against this kind of effect, and also has made a clear values choice, because there is a clear right and wrong in this conflict. Again, that support across all of these domains. The technical attacks that have been prevented or mitigated by Microsoft and by Mandiant or by many more, the communications interdiction that's been mitigated by SpaceX with Starlink, and private sector bringing in the capabilities that government cannot, but also governments providing that critical support, and particularly in the information warfare that is around Ukraine, not inside Ukraine. Countering that Russian strategic information campaign that was designed to prepare for war, getting national level support. The intelligence disclosures from primarily the US and the UK ahead of the war, not only preparing the general public, not only heading off specific initiatives by Russia that then didn't take place, but also making sure that the narratives fell flat among the people who vote for leaders in Western countries. And making sure that Russia, at least in the Euro-Atlantic space, did not achieve the justification for the war that it was hoping to. And governments and the EU, no matter how much they didn't want to believe it was going to happen, nevertheless weren't taken by surprise by the invasion and didn't start yet again with a blank sheet of paper with policy options for dealing with Russia at the top, as has happened so many times before. So yes, there have been successes, but successes also bring some challenges. And just as in conventional military operations, there's a risk of becoming the victim of success in terms of succumbing to excessive optimism and complacency. And here I'm not talking about the people who are fighting the fight, whether it's at a keyboard or in a trench outside Severodonetsk. I'm talking about among the general public with less of an understanding of what is happening. And once again, among their elected leaders who are sensitive to the same information flows as they are, because there is a public perception that nothing is happening, that there is no cyber war. Non-specialist media are still wondering aloud why it is not happening, or as one of our academic colleagues would say, why cyber war is not taking place. There is a great deal more work to be done to get the message across outside this bubble here that actually there is a fight going on. And not only that, but that it takes resources, energy, hard work, preparation. It's a reflection of this common problem that a cyber attack isn't perceived at all unless it succeeds and unless there is collateral damage. Other than that, it is completely invisible to the population at large. Now, the fellow greybeards in the audience will remember Y2K and the massive effort that went into mitigating that problem, and the way that success in mitigating it was rewarded by the public perception that actually it hadn't been a problem in the first place because it didn't happen. We're in danger of succumbing to the same situation again now. So it's absolutely vital to deliver the message that success in defense in the future is going to take the same amount of expenditure and preparation. But there's one even more substantial risk here as well as a result of success. If we focus on successes in the immediate operations and in the ongoing temporary information war in and around Ukraine, we forget that not only cyber can't win the war alone, possibly even military success won't win the war alone, because Russia can and does use other information warfare means for strategic effect over decades-long time spans, not temporary within Ukraine, to erode and to undermine the essential support for Ukraine that it needs in order to continue to fight the war and to win. Not military support in terms of weapons deliveries, but economic, humanitarian, most of all political, that is absolutely essential. And the problem we see there is with this long preparation that Russia has had and the intensive efforts in trying to get the West into a mindset where it will not oppose Russia, we see so many phrases and ideas and narratives that originated in Russian tools of influences permeating the Western political debate and being repeated verbatim by Western political leaders, decision makers, even, very depressingly, service chiefs. And the main theme that's relevant here is the one of self-deterrence by Western countries. The way in some countries the avoidance of escalation with Russia has been elevated to the status of a fetish and is driving absolutely every policy decision when it comes to supporting Ukraine. So my last message would be that, yes, Russia has suffered tactical and operational reverses in cyber terms as well as it has in military terms, but strategically and over the long term, it has not lost the war, and there is far more work to be done. Thank you.
So not only do we have an amazing panel, but we have an amazing audience, right? So this audience is full of expertise and experience to bring to bear on this issue, including your questions for the panel. So now we're going to open the floor and open this panel to Q&A from all of you and each of the panelists. So please raise your hand, and you can say your name and where you're from and what you would like to ask of this panel. I see first hand right here in the middle. Please stand up. There you are. That's you.
Oh, thanks. Hi, Josh Gold, Government of Canada. First of all, thanks for the panel. I'm also wondering whether any of the panelists or all can comment to the significance or impact of Russian military seizure of telecoms infrastructure or ISPs in certain cities or areas in Ukraine that they've maybe been holding or are holding, and to like whether that's been successful in connecting to Russian internet censorship infrastructure and that sort of thing. Thanks.
Super. Roman, you can also weigh in.
Well, of course, having access to mines and having the possibility to change the situation in the information sphere on occupied territories is a primary focus of Russian Federation. And we were aware of their attempts to take control over the telecom infrastructure in the occupied territories. And they basically started from getting control over broadcasting infrastructure. This happened in Kherson, and this happened in Melitopol and many other cities. So around 7-8 broadcasting centers and TV towers, and this was done very quickly. So they focused on this, and they were ready to reconfigure the equipment within 10-20 hours in order to gain this coverage of their TV channels and radio stations, sowing propaganda on these occupied territories. For the long time, we tried to keep our Ukrainian national telecom infrastructure alive on these territories, and there were signs of rerouting, so we observed this activity, this illegal activity. But yesterday, it happened that most of Kherson region was routed through Rostelecom, and of course, this is a violation of any international laws, and we addressed to the ITU regarding this issue, of course. What we can do? We can continue our efforts in building of resilient infrastructure for broadcasting of Ukrainian TV signal, of trying to get back the control over these telecom infrastructures. And I understand that if you have an access to equipment, you have credentials, you can reconfigure it and then reroute the traffic through Russian interception systems and for obvious reasons. But again, we understand that information warfare is part of this hybrid war, and this legal activity from Russia will be continued. But nevertheless, we will concentrate on countering these issues, and hopefully we'll find new approaches how to deal with these absolutely new challenges for our country.
I would like to add also, if I may. So I should say that really, in a modern war, those who control the information sphere have great advantage. And that was the tactics of Russia in 2014, when they invaded part of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast, and it was an annexation of Crimea. The first thing that they had done, they captured the broadcasting facilities there. They totally turned off Ukrainian TV channels and put on Russia and Belarusia TV. And they cut off also the Ukrainian internet broadcasting. So they created information blockade there, these territories. And you know what are the consequences. So they are doing the same thing right now, and it's more than 20 broadcasting facilities of Ukraine that are being captured or destroyed by Russian troops. So they do basically the same. They are broadcasting Russian channels to the territories of Ukraine. But the thing is that they do broadcast Russian TV through the satellites of our European partners. And that is the problem. And we asked the European Union to help us with this. We asked the French government to support us, for Russia to stop their business with French satellite operator, Eutelsat company. And there were 3 Russian broadcasting companies that went under sanctions. But these Russian companies, they were broadcasting like an international television in foreign languages. They were broadcasting on the territories of the European Union. And of course, there's a good step that European Union started active measures to fight with Russian propaganda. But it didn't really much help Ukraine, because still Russian channels are being translated through French satellite to our occupied territories. And we are waiting for a 3rd package of sanctions. And we hope that more broadcasting and Russian television subjects are included in this package. Thank you.
Okay, next question. Right there.
Good morning. Paul Luciana, Netherlands Defense Academy. I've got a question to, I guess, Care. Thanks for the excellent presentations. And I was wondering about an adjacent field of military operations, electronic warfare, and operations in the electromagnetic spectrum, closely connected or adjacent to cyberspace operations. As you said, if we don't notice the operations, people tend to think that they didn't happen, right? So, in my view, we've been researching this in the Netherlands as well. We haven't seen much of EW operations too. Could you allude a bit on that issue, please?
Certainly. I'm very concerned that you detected precisely the 30 seconds of my prepared comments that I deleted to hit 10 minutes. Yes, it is another example of the impression that nothing is happening, but it's a slightly different one. And now we do see some reasons why Russia's EW capability that was supposed to be so formidable has not played a visible, appreciable role in this conflict, such as, for example, again, the overconfidence, sending forward files of armor without their supporting elements, like, for example, EW. But, on the other hand, the failure then to follow up, once they realize the nature of the conflict, and bring into play their EW capabilities, is one of those mysteries about the war that we will only find out when the history books are written and the classified archives are open. It's as though some ally of Ukraine had some means of holding those capabilities at risk and presenting them functioning. But of course, we who operate in the open sources domain cannot possibly speculate what or how that might be. All we see is that it is one of the things that Russia thinks is important and ought to have been doing, but simply hasn't appeared, at least not in ways that we can see it happening. So there are no doubt people in this room who know far more about precisely why that is happening than I do.
Indeed. Just here on the left.
Matthias Kappel, German Cyber Reserve. I had a specific interest in this very innovative way you raised support through the call for via the Telegram group for you collected, I think, about 250,000 people from all over the world helping you in the cyber war. The question would be, how does one organize 250,000 people? How efficient was that? Was that a success? To which extent could you make effective use of it?
That is a great question. Roman?
Yes, probably let me have a comment on this, because we were researching this situation. Yes, this situation is very interesting in terms of a huge amount of volunteers from around the world connected to this call, I would say. It actually helped us to feel more not alone in this fight. But of course, I think this huge amount of people acting irregularly, I would say, because there was actually no single point of coordination in this situation. Yes, it created, as we can observe, it created a huge force directed towards Russians. I mean, in terms of DDoS attacks, first of all, because that amount of volunteers created, first of all, a huge wave of DDoS attack against Russian. But as well as an anonymous group, there were different groups that were acting more precisely, more sophisticated. And probably for people, there were different situations when some DDoS actions were preventing some more technically sophisticated operations. Yes, it is, I think, the problem that cannot be solved just by creating Telegram channels. But I think there should be some more organized coordination between this kind of amount of people. But yes, the situation is very interesting, and it is subject to be researched in the future because there was no such an experience in the world before.
So one site is the Distributed Denial of Secrets website that over 6 million documents as of a few weeks ago had been taken from Russia, official documents, and posted on this site. And it will literally take years for researchers to absorb them and to parse them. But it has been probably the result of a worldwide collection of hackers anonymously volunteering. So let's see the next hand, just here in the middle. Indeed, you, right there.
Hello, Dennis Tkachuk, Cloudflare. So while the whole world is obviously applauding the bravery and courage of Ukraine, both on the battlefield, and in the cyberspace, and how you quickly ramped up your resilience, the question, because we're talking about the cyber war, we established that it's a global cyber war. I think it might sound a bit provocative, but in a normal war, we typically would be thinking about also counterattacking, suppressing the enemy to actually diminish their capability to actually attack. So, my question would be around what is your take, what is your opinion on, actually diminishing Russia's ability to attack the free world, to attack the democracies? Because obviously, even if they stop the attacks on the ground, their capability of actually attacking, in the cyberspace are pretty much unlimited. So, what is your take on actually putting it down, or at least limiting their resources, and how we can help that, or how we can look at that as a strategy as well?
Well, thank you. I suppose the most effective way of preventing Russia for escalation in cyber war is the instrument of sanctions, and both technological and financial. Since every operation requires preparation for it, and it requires human resources, it requires technologies, infrastructure, and sometimes the great budgets are spent in preparation of these cyber attacks. In case Russia isn't able to finance these operations, of course, the danger, the threat from Russian military hackers will decrease. Again, we observe a number of cases great number of cases when Western technology company had cut off their business in Russia, and that means that a lot of licenses of software, technologies, hardware is no longer available for Russia, and especially in case of having ability to use infrastructures abroad, I'm confident that there's much more intention from cyber intelligence to cases of use of such infrastructure for attacking Ukraine and other countries. And in case these technological sanctions continue, we believe that it would be much more difficult to organize these attacks from side of Russian Federation, since you cannot create the infrastructure for attacking out from nothing. The next point is that we observe a constant intellectual flow out from Russia. So for some extent, we can expect that the attacking potential is approaching its limit. The number of skilled people who are used in organizing and providing these attacks is limited to number of military servants and number of cyber criminals that joined these groups that target Ukrainian critical infrastructure and infrastructures in other countries. And in case this potential cannot be increased by Russia, I suppose the impact, the global impact of the operation would decrease. Again, sanctions should continue in order to stop the escalation of this cyber aggression, and I believe our joint efforts will be effective.
Kenneth, may I continue a little bit on that?
Sure.
I think that one of the reasons that we have not really seen any cyber operations in Finland is probably because the resources are busy failing in Ukraine, and there will not be any more skilled resources coming or adding to it. So that might be one of the reasons why we are not seeing what we have been expecting.
There's a question here in the middle, yes.
Hi, Johanna Weaver from the Tech Policy Design Centre at the Australian National University. I want to echo the comments of the previous question about the bravery and the courage of the Ukrainians. I also wanted to particularly acknowledge Nataliya and Victor's weight that you personally carry on your shoulders with respect to the cyber defences. And my question is related to that in the sense that we've heard quite a lot about the role of the private sector in assisting Ukrainians. I have heard it described that, particularly at the beginning of this conflict, the private sector was sort of tripping over itself in terms of trying to offer assistance. And so my question to you is twofold. One, is that still happening, and is there anything that we in this room can do to help the burden that the two of you are carrying? And then twofold, is there anything we can learn from this experience so that if we are in this situation again, that we can have a coordination in place in advance?
Well, thank you. Yes, this is a unique example how the private sector can contribute to the global task of defending our country in cyberspace. And this was initiated before the war with the first strikes, which I described earlier. I mean, in the middle of January, we gathered with a group of Ukrainian experts, and we started a discussion, what should we change in order to prevent the following attacks against Ukraine. So it was obvious that the war is prepared and cyber attacks will proceed and will support military operation. We didn't know when it should happen, but we were confident that the war will start in the nearest future. And our first meetings regarding how to protect energy sector, for example, started in the end of December. So we came to a conclusion that we should first of all raise the awareness, raise the responsibility of CISOs and critical infrastructures. We should make changes to our legislation to allow experts participate in bug bounties, in responsible disclosure of vulnerabilities that can be found in government entities and critical infrastructure. We should concentrate on raising salaries for responsible people, of course, in order to hire professionals for these positions. And this is, we should probably organize some mobile teams and enhance the coordination between cybersecurity agencies. So that was a set of initiatives, and some of them even partially have been implemented during the war. But the first approach was to talk to expert community. And when the war started, we were offered a huge number of different proposals. So stepping back to the huge number of volunteers that join the Ukraine IT army and the rest who work on separate tasks, is of course their will to help country with their skills, with their knowledge and experience. And this is priceless, of course. Their activity, which Roman just mentioned, is self-coordinated, so it's volunteer activity. And while Ukrainian official agencies still concentrate on cyber defense, cyber protection of our critical infrastructure and government websites, and we are helping business at the same time. So we understand that a lot of businesses were forced to move out of their locations. They need to move their IT infrastructures to clouds or to data centers in the western part of Ukraine or even abroad, and that requires a lot of help, which was provided from the government, from SSCIP, which I present here, and other entities. And this is a kind of bilateral movement. So we offered an assistance from private sector, and at the same time, the government offered assistance to those businesses who suffered from the consequences of war and needed assistance in their in continue their businesses in new IT infrastructures. Some of experts joined our service or joined armed forces in order to help being a military servants, in order to help building the cybersecurity systems and enhancing, improving of technologies used and mechanisms that help protect our country in these challenging times. And again, what is extremely valuable for us is the help of global IT community, global IT players that offered us cloud infrastructures, licenses, threat intelligence, hardware, a lot of other assistance that is very important and very valuable for our cyber resilience. And again, this help is hard to overestimate. So this are all examples of public-private partnership, and I believe that after our victory, we will concentrate on keeping of this synergy of helping each other, and no doubt this will bring us to a completely new results and level of cooperation.
Back there. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Lisa Past, and I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for Homeland Security here in Estonia. And my question comes from the premise that often when people say they're not seeing cyber attacks, it's not because there's a lack of cyber attacks, but because they're flying blind. So given what I understand to be a rather on-prem and diverse information system ecosystem in Ukraine prior to February 24th, how would you assess our visibility into the Ukrainian systems and then also around the cyber attacks or cyber operations around the war in Ukraine earlier this year? How well were we seeing?
I propose we probably will have 3 short answers. But the lessons from NotPetya were particularly of improving cooperation, improving visibility, improving information exchange. And the project of building a security operations center in Tripoli, CIP, which was led by Roman, and the creation of a National Cybersecurity Coordination Center, which is managed by Nataliya, and many other capacities for providing 24 hours monitoring of our cyberspace in order to proactively work on mitigating cyber threats. That was one of major approaches, together with raising of awareness, cyber hygiene, and a lot of many things. We understand that cybersecurity is, of course, people, processes, technology, but the main focus should be put into coordination and information exchange, not only between Ukrainian cybersecurity agencies, but with our international partners as well. And this is the effect that was significantly improved from the beginning of war. That this allows us to get prompt information on potential threats and indicators of compromise 24 hours. And we get this from all around the globe, and this is really 24 hours, and this allows us to react promptly, just like as it happened in Ukrainian regional power distribution company with the Industroyer 2, which was promptly identified and mitigated. That's a very good example of this international cooperation and use of threat intel for timely response to these threats.
Lisa, you said, how much do we see? And the problem is that there are a lot of different we's that could apply to, and they all have very different motivations for how much they want to see. Now, a lot of the commercial entities involved in it will, of course, have a very clear picture of what's going on. But then at the other end of the spectrum, you have the political climate that I referred to earlier, where it would be preferable not to see, in some cases, what is happening. And I'm referring, for example, to the spillover of the Viasat hack again. Effects across Europe, some of them quite substantial. I heard in a conversation in one of the pre-events this week the suggestion that the reason why that was not treated as harm caused by Russia and something which should be taken up by Russia was because it was cyber, and therefore it was something special, which is not the business of NATO. Nobody should be talking about Article 5. Nobody should be thinking about countermeasures. The problem is, looking at it in the longer term, it fits into a very different pattern of the willingness of European countries to play down attacks by Russia over a period of years, which in many cases have been indistinguishable from acts of war. But the problem is that if you recognize them as such, whether it is Russian military officers traveling to the Czech Republic and Bulgaria to blow up munitions dumps in classic behind-the-line sabotage, where it's the ongoing classic electronic warfare cross-border into Norway, for example, all of these things, including special operations against NATO members, have not been elevated to the level of a conversation about whether this is actually a real attack by Russia. Because if you do that, suddenly, politicians are presented with the challenge of actually having to do something about it. And so it doesn't reach that threshold. And this, again, is tapping into the problem that I referred to earlier, which is the overriding impression that has permeated so many of our political debates, that any attempt to impede Russia in what it wants to do to its neighbors is inevitably going to lead to uncontrollable escalation up to the level of global conflict, including exchanges of nuclear weapons. We hear this repeated again and again by senior Western politicians, again, repeating the narratives that we hear from President Putin and every other level of the Russian information warfare apparatus. The challenge, then, is a willful disregard of what has been going on for so long. And where Ukraine, as in so many other ways, is doing us the favor, is in winning that argument that we no longer need to argue uphill about the fact that Russia is a challenge. Russia is a hostile state. Russia is invading its neighbors, causing damage across the rest of Europe. That basic fact now has been established. So what I'm hoping is that everything else that follows on from that in terms of Western responses should now be a little bit easier.
And if I may continue that why not acknowledge every attack that we see? For example, if you look at airspace violations, in Finland we have this policy that each and every time Russia violates our airspace, we publish it in the newspapers for everyone to see. But the problem of doing the same in cyberspace is, of course, that what about those things that you really haven't seen, and then you kind of give out your capacity or lack of capacity to actually detect everything that is going on. So maybe better also to play them down.
I would like to add, I think that if we are talking about enhancing international cooperation in cyber, so the first thing that we need to do is common attribution. Really, that all the countries really should say it is Russia, and we know this. Because when it was Black Energy cyber attacks, and we attributed it to Russia, we had so many questions, like, but why do you think it's Russia? What evidences do you have? And many countries officially doubted our conclusions. And we are very thankful to our partners, the United States, Great Britain, Netherlands, who supported us. And we had made a common statement. But now I think it's obvious that Russia is this malicious player in cyberspace. So,
absolutely true. When the masks are off, we, of course, understand who stand behind the majority of cyber attacks. But before the war, we were very accurate in attributing. We all know that it's difficult to deal with, and we need to convince everybody. We have 100% proven evidences that can allow us to come to a conclusion for particular attribution of every attack. But we were often asked, what about Boiarchuk, for example? Did you investigate this case? And this is a grand example of international cooperation with regards to attribution. Since, of course, on the 24th of February, CCDCOE and other cybersecurity agencies were busy with other issues, unfortunately. And we felt lack of visibility regarding this particular case. But we were provided with the materials that obviously prove who stood behind this attack, and that was done by our partners. And this allowed these statements of 27 countries who recognized Russia an aggressor in cyberspace. And this is the key factor which allows us in future address to this status, having enough evidences for other cybersecurity incidents. And what is more important, and we've been doing this for the whole period of war, not recording only evidences of war crimes of Russia, but of cybersecurity crimes as well. So we collect these evidences and we will then give it to the ICC in order to be punished. So this is a hybrid war, and the responsibility should be both for war crimes and for cyber crimes as well.
Stu.
Urimas Kupris from CCDCOE. As you mentioned, some of the speakers already mentioned that behavior of actors affiliated with Russia changed since end of February. The operations were focused more on Ukraine, while other nations were left less, at least they were not in the focus of attention. I would like to ask if you observed also change in behavior of other actors who probably didn't stop their malicious activities both in Ukraine or around the world. Thank you.
Maybe at present, really, all the attention of the Russian Federation is on Ukraine. But we predict that in nearest future, and actually it's already going on, the Western countries will be the main object for attacks. And we can see the new vectors of such attacks. First of all, it is industrial espionage. Because of sanctions, Russia lost access to new technologies. And this country will try all illegal instruments to get this. So really, Western countries need to be prepared to this. And the second thing, we're witnessing that Russia actually legalizing, I would call it cyber piracy. You know, like it was in medieval ages when a sovereign gave permission to a pirate to rob ships of other countries. And this pirate was sharing this illegal income to the sovereign. So, taking into consideration that all the Russian hacker groups are being under control of Russian special services, and Russia has a substantial problems with its budget because of sanctions. So Russian hackers will simply be officially allowed to rob Western banks, you know, to deal with this deficit of budgeting. And that is the new threats that we see for Western countries.
Just here.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Midshipman Veronica O'Connor of the United States Naval Academy. And my question is, how do you view the actions of independent, non-state-affiliated hacktivists, such as the Belarusian railway hackers, since they don't operate with any oversight from the Ukrainian government but still support your cause?
Thanks. Roman?
Actually, yes, when we were researching the actions of that huge amount of people involved in the situation, yes, there was not just a question of understanding of coordination or any kind of purpose or target setting, but also there was an ethical question on what are these actions can lead to. Basically, a lot of international volunteers were aiming not just only governmental resources or military resources, but other resources which were also affecting the other people in a country. And of course, what lessons we can learn from this situation is, first of all, there is a huge support on a volunteer basis, not just in our country, but also around the world. And the second is that for such kind of situation, in our country, for example, or probably in any other institutions, there was no completely preparedness for any kind of informational distribution or communication. While in this situation, it would be very, very on demand, I would say. Thank you.
So I think we'll call an end to the questions. There's 1 minute left. And I do just want to take one last opportunity to salute Ukraine for its amazing defense of its country, including their President Zelensky for really an unforgettable performance thus far, I think, in communicating with Ukrainians, in communicating with other countries, the importance of defending Ukraine, the importance of defending democracy, and our role in working together towards rule of law and towards a better future for Europe and for all of us. So thank you so much to the panel. Thank you, Roman, for joining us from Kiev. And let's have lunch. Thank you.
Well, we have a couple of gifts.